Chapter 53. Fear and horror gripped Sakura's heart in a stranglehold. Her breathing hitched, lungs refusing to contract or expand as her eyes fixed themselves over her shoulder, staring at the demonic-looking head that was fixed onto her. No, into her, integrating into her body seamlessly through his bloodline ability. She could feel him there with every breath he took, as if he was a part of her. Karen snapped out of her own shock first. The chains that had been frozen in the air rattled as they moved again, aiming for the second head. Sakura could only think that she meant to have them coil around his throat and yank him free, hopefully pulling the rest of him out too. "You should think twice before you do that, unless you want this girl to die with me," Lacan warned. "We've merged into one now. Without my chakra acting as a medium to make it possible, you'll kill us both from the rejection. You don't want your little friend to die because of that, now do you?" The chains stilled in the air, unmoving once more. Then they withdrew an arm's length to avoid making contact with either of them. Whether or not the threat was real, it didn't seem like Karen would risk using them. An amused chuckle left his mouth, as if proud. "Good girl. You." Steel cut through the air as Karen threw a stolen kunai the moment that he opened his mouth to talk. Sakura fought against her reflex to dodge as it speared through the space between her face and shoulder, aiming for the demonic head there. What followed wasn't the wet sound of flesh and bone being pierced, but instead the dull thud of the sharpened point burying into the ground just behind where Sakura was. "Careful now," he said as his head emerged next to hers again, on the opposite side. The coarse strands of his hairs grated against her cheek as he slid his head next to hers, making them uncomfortably closer. "Our bodies are merged to the extent that I can form my limbs or hide my body entirely inside of hers. If you strike me carelessly, you'll hurt her too." Karen tensed at that, while cradling another kunai in her palm. Then her gaze shifted to the vermilion bird, which tossed the sedated prisoner down in front of its master. She grabbed him by the hair and pulled his head back, exposing his pale throat as she pressed the kunai against it. "Get out of her, or I'll kill him." His response to her taking his brother hostage was merely to chuckle. Then Sakura felt a burning pain eating away at her from the inside, starting at her stomach. She couldn't help but let out a cry, bringing her hands there as she fell over and curled up in pain. "We're bonded at a protonic level, meaning that I can do all sorts of things to her with a thought," he explained as Karen glared at him. "For example, I can disassemble her entire cellular structure in such a way that the destruction of the cells invokes the immune system to respond by raising the body temperature and releasing chemicals that tell her brain that she's suffering from acute pain. And it will only grow more intense the longer it lasts, until it burns itself out trying to heal the damage, or I snuff out every cell in her body. Get out of her now, or I'll slit your brother's throat and let you watch him bleed out." Karen threatened as Sakura clenched her teeth and grasped the fabric with bold fingers. Sweat beaded her brow. It felt like she was burning up now, leaving her to believe it wasn't a lie. "I wonder how your boyfriend will react, knowing that his teammates suffered and died because of you," he mused in a mocking tone. "He'll never forgive you, will he?" Karen's expression darkened before looking over to Suzaku. "If I release your brother, you'll kill her anyway," she pointed out hesitantly, as if reasoning to herself on her next course of action. "I'll take him with me and explain everything, telling them that I did my best, but I couldn't save her. That's all I can do now." Sakura could see the slight tremor in her hands as they held the kunai in hostage. Despite her best efforts to convince herself, Karen didn't want to leave or abandon her. And if Sakura could see that, then her capturer certainly could see it as well. "Do you think he'll forgive you for abandoning a friend he's known longer than you just to save yourself?" he continued. "Of course not. You won't be able to face that little boyfriend of yours and will run away again, alone and miserable until we catch you. It would be much easier if you just surrendered now, otherwise her death won't be pleasant." His words were playing on her fears, striking at her heart to break her resolve. Sakura feared, the way things stood, Karen would cave in and that would be the end of it. She would die, Karen would be taken, Sasuke would remain missing, and Naruto would lose the three people that he cared about the most. This won't be the forest of death again. Sakura decided as she forced her head off the ground and spotted the kunai that was thrown earlier. She bore with the pain burning her up on the inside to reach for it, taking it into her grasp as she swallowed the lump in her throat. Then she jabbed it towards the second head that was over her shoulder. The point fell short as a limb emerged from her chest and grabbed her wrist. There was a disdainful look in his eyes as he tightened his grip. The pressure was intense, to the extent she felt the bones starting to crack, forcing her to drop it. Hostages should know their place. Sakura couldn't suppress a whine at the pain, but she didn't give up. They couldn't suffer a witness to whatever they had planned, so she was dead the moment they caught her. At the very least, she refused to be used as a bargaining tool against her friends. Pouring her chakra into the ground to use the hiding in a surface technique, she turned to Karen and shouted, "Surround us so he can't get away." Karen hesitated for a moment. Then her extended chains stretched out again and formed a circle that built on itself. Soon a cocoon was formed around them, no way out, and leaving them trapped inside as they began slipping beneath the surface. Not at all expecting the change in dynamics, Lucan looked down on Sakura and demanded, "What are you planning?" "I'm going to cancel the technique underground," Sakura said as they reached the point where her abdomen was phasing into the ground. The pain, among other things, were slowing her down. But with the cage up it didn't matter, as long as she managed to submerge them entirely. "You can guess what'll happen if you're sharing my body then, right?" The hiding in a surface technique allowed one to phase through a surface by suffusing it with chakra, allowing the user to pass through or hide within it. Then the user would use their chakra control to squeeze themselves in and out of the space that was created by the technique. But if you cancelled the technique while in a solid surface, it was instant death. "You're bluffing," he said with a snarl upon realizing that, since he was joined with her, he'd die as well. His only escape would put him into the cage surrounding them, which had already proven capable of neutralizing his cursed seal entirely if it connected. "I'm going to die anyway at this rate," Sakura said unwaveringly, now up to her chest within the ground. "So, isn't it natural that I'd be willing to sacrifice myself to protect a friend?" Her eyes, her voice, nothing betrayed that fact. She was going to sacrifice herself if it meant killing him, so that Karen didn't have to bear the burden. And so that Sasuke could eventually be brought back to the village. Realizing that he was now her hostage, all sense of superiority he had disappeared in an instant as the ground swallowed them up to her shoulders. He glared at her murderously before his cowardice won out. All at once, before her head sank beneath the surface, Lucan took the gamble between imprisonment or death and ejected himself from Sakura's body. The chains immediately closed in, crushing him between the links as they covered him from head to toe. The cursed seal markings vanished before the full body bind abruptly shot towards the nearest building and slammed his unempowered body against a wall out of spite. "Ah. Bastard." Karen called him before dropping his brother onto the ground unceremoniously and leaving Suzaku to watch over him. She then ran over as Sakura squeezed herself out of the ground, body continuing to burn on the inside with a feverish heat. Karen hovered over her with medical chakra lining her hands, running them over her body. "NGH, don't think you've done yourself any favors here by catching us," the conscious twin stated as he writhed in the hole he'd been thrown into. "It would have been better if you just come with." His words died as the rattle of a chain drowned it out. Emerging from Karen's backside, the length tore through the fabric of her clothes as it crossed the distance between them. Wrapping itself around his throat, it proceeded to strangle him mercilessly. Karen's ruby-toned eyes were narrowed. Anger and hate stormed behind them in place of where there had been weakness and hesitation before when Sakura had been taken hostage. Murderous intent that rivaled the look in Sasuke's eyes back when he'd first awoken the cursed seal in the forest of death sent a chill up Sakura's spine. She reached up to Karen's shoulders to grab her attention before she could drown in it. "He has information we need. Let's take him alive." There was a tense moment before Karen exhaled. The murderous eyes softened and the chain choking him abruptly shattered into motes. "Fine." He gasped for air, streamlets of drool slipping from the corner of his lips before chuckling between breaths. "Heh, too soft, after all. To get inside of the village someone had to have helped you," Sakura said, addressing him as she sat upright. "Who was it?" The captive shrugged his shoulders as he continued panting. "Won't matter, soon." Sakura waited for him to give a more definite answer than that, but when it was clear he refused to say anything further, Karen yanked the chain holding him down. He hit his forehead onto the ground hard enough to draw blood before she flipped him onto his back. Then she dragged him over and put him down like she'd done with his brother. "I'm sorry," Karen said, gingerly brushing Sakura's wrist afterwards. It went numb under her touch before she helped Sakura up and over to Suzaku. "Whatever they have planned, it'll take time to go through the normal channels to figure out, so we're going to have to change our plans to get you help as well." Sanada House. "You should at least introduce yourself to him," Princess Jiraiya said from his seat opposite of his teammate. "He'd appreciate knowing he has a bit more family around." At the moment, the Toad Sage was trying to convince Sanada to at least stop by to visit Naruto's party. She was keeping her word about not drinking, and the therapy sessions were helping. But she was acting like a recluse for the most part, rarely leaving her home unless prompted by the old man. While Shizune was growing accustomed to her home again and making a place for herself, Sanada was still distant enough that he suspected she would leave the first chance she got. She needed new ties to the village to make it more than just a place consisting of buildings and people, but somewhere she truly called home. And Naruto could use more adult figures in his life, so Jiraiya was hoping that it would be a good chance for them to get to know one another for both of their sakes. Sanada, sitting with one leg crossed over the other as she looked at some report of Shizune's, peered up from it and gave him an annoyed glare. "I'm not going to waste my time playing with a bunch of brats, Jiraiya. Quit asking." As Shizune entered from the kitchen, he turned to her and said, "Back me up on this, Shizune-chan. Princess could spend a little more time with the kids, right?" The apprentice jostled slightly at being brought into the conversation and having her lady's eyes turned on her, one brow raised, as if daring her to go along with Jiraiya. It was telling that relief came across her face as she turned towards the door at the sound of rampant knocking. She excused herself to go answer, leaving Jiraiya alone with an irate Sanada that looked as though she was deciding on how best to punt him through the wall. "Miss Uzumaki." Shizune's shocked tone grabbed their attention. They both turned towards the door to see Karen, her clothing dirty and stained with sweat, while strands of her red hair were clinging to her forehead. There was a visible bruise on her cheek as well. Next to her was Naruto's teammate, looking ill and feverish. It didn't look like she could support herself from how she was starting to waver on her feet. "We need your help." Jiraiya rose to his feet, the previous levity in his tone gone. "What happened to you two?" "Sakura and I were attacked in the Uchiha district by a pair of cursed seal users," she explained, gesturing to door where Suzaku was. "The bodies were hanging off its back, wrapped in chains. We were looking for Sasuke Uchiha since he didn't come to the party when they attacked us after we figured out that he was missing." Sanada swore under her breath, a sentiment that Jiraiya shared as Shizune helped Sakura into the home and sat her down before taking a look at her. While that was going on, they got the details from Karen on everything that had transpired. Sasuke Uchiha had been either taken or willingly left the village for a day or more. The captured pair were among those who'd been a part of the group chasing her during the breakout, and there was some plan to destroy the village. Someone had to have helped them get into the village, and there's only a handful of people I could be sure weren't involved when we were pressed for time with Sakura's condition. So we came here, since I sensed all of you together," Karen finished. "Jiraiya-sama, if you can come with me then we can get the priestess mask and I can get the information from their heads right away." After giving it some thought, Jiraiya agreed with her logic. It was safe to say that at this point someone had to have helped them get past the village's detection system for them to be able to get inside so easily and for the last Uchiha to vanish without being spotted. And if that was circumvented, what else could they have gotten into? There were a number of things that Orochimaru could be after. He turned towards Shizune and asked, "How's she look?" "His bloodline seems to trigger apoptosis in the body," Shizune said cautiously. "He tricked it into destroy the cells at an accelerated rate and then has his own replicate in their place the longer they were merged. But it could also be necrosis or something else. Consider her pain. Either way, her body is going into overdrive trying to get rid of the foreign cells and cope with the destruction of some essential ones. She can recover with some help, but I should get her into the hospital as soon as possible." "Okay, then do that and make sure she's taken care of." The Toad Sage then turned to Tsunade. "Princess, go see the old man and tell him everything. Whatever they have planned, it's likely to be happening soon. We'll get the information to you as soon as possible." Naruto birthday party. Kiba's ears twitched as a barely audible grumble reached his ears, leaving him to look over to his teammate, Shino. Aburame, in general, were rather calm and collected. That allowed for them to make for rational decisions during times of both war and peace, as well as leave their Kakachu unbothered by the fluctuations in chakra during times of heightened emotions. So for him to be, for lack of a better term, bugged, meant that something was off. "What's eating at you?" "The Kakachu that I've scattered to deal with any mosquitoes and other pests in the area are disappearing," he explained. "Something is preying on them." "Isn't that natural though? They're pretty small, so other bugs could eat them, right? Not in these numbers and within the village. It is unnatural." His posture shifted as he took a step behind Kiba and turned around, so their backs were facing one another. "I wish to investigate it, but I don't want to cause any undue concern." Kiba didn't think that there was anything, but shrugged. If it sets Shino's mind at ease, why not? Alright. I'll keep an ear out. Shino crouched down and made the ram seal as he gathered his chakra into his hand, shaping into the insect gathering technique before setting his fingers down on the ground in a spread pattern. Strands of chakra shot out of the tenketsu and into the grass and dirt, lingering there to draw in any nearby bugs or subterranean ones that could inform him of his surroundings. It was a good 30 seconds before the ground shifted and worms emerged, drawn in by the technique. Shino listened to it for a moment before he released the technique and stood up again. "You find something?" Kiba asked. "There's something abnormal under the ground," he said. "I'll get Hinata to confirm it before notifying the others. But be on guard." A slight nod of the head was all the confirmation he gave before Shino started walking towards Hinata, who was nestled between with Tenten and Ino. Girl talk from the sound of it. It was still probably nothing, since this was a training field after all, but it wouldn't hurt to be a little cautious. So Kiba whistled in a low tone for his ninja hound. Akamaru's head snapped up from his perch on Ayama's lap once it reached his ears and he climbed down, coming over to his partner. He crouched down and patted the puppy on the head, telling him to remain vigilant. However, before Hinata activated her eyes, the ground began to rumble violently. "What's happening?" Ino asked, startled as she clung to the chair she was sitting in. "Is it an earthquake?" Any answers she may have received were drowned out as the earth upturned, knocking aside the tables and kicking up dust as it rose. Bodies scrambled away as the shinobi among the group jumped away and landed on their feet, while Ayama was carried off by Naruto in both his arms as he stuck the landing and then darted away as far as he could to safety with her. As the dust veil obscuring their views slowly cleared, they found that now looming over them was a giant of stone, with thick limbs compassing its arms and legs. "Okay, wasn't expecting that," the Inyazuka would admit to himself as the golem craned its head around as though it was searching for something. Either way, he was fairly sure that it wasn't supposed to be here. "Boss? What is this thing?" asked the Hokage's grandson as Naruto deposited Ayama next to him, along with the toads. No sooner than he'd set them down did the golem's gaze fix on him, and it used its hands to scoop up a mound of dirt that compressed with a crumpling sound to form a boulder. "Not friendly," Naruto answered before making the cross seal and conjuring two clones to grab the kid, toads, and Ayama, carrying them off in the opposite directions as the boulder was thrown in his direction. He dove out of the way as it crashed down on where he'd been, half burying itself into the ground that buckled under the impact. Then, before he could get back onto his feet, something that flashed golden slammed into him. Tumbling over and back, Naruto let out a short, pained cry before coming to a stop on the ground again. This time his entire abdomen and arms were covered in what looked to be golden webbing, clinging to him and pinning his arms into place, no matter how hard he strained. "I can't get free." Now on high alert, Rock Lee rushed over to help. But before he could, Neji shouted, "Lee, stop." He did so just in time as a golden blur whizzed past where his head would have been otherwise and then hit the ground with a thud, revealing it to be an arrow. Kiba whipped his head around to where it had come from and spotted what looked to be an onrushing carpet of black and red. One of the girls screamed as spiders of various sizes poured from the woodlands surrounding them, crawling forward like an onrushing wave. That explains what happened to Shino's bugs, at least, Kiba thought as Akamaru snarled at the arachnids before turning back towards Naruto as his body was aglow from calling up enough chakra that it was visible. He clearly intended to reinforce his strength and break the bonds, but the attempt was cut short as a pair of arms burst from the ground beneath him and grabbed hold. Another one. The chakra that Naruto had been getting ready to build up was siphoned from his body and into the arms. They tightened and pulled him down flat against the ground, forcing out his breath. Then the earth crumbled beneath him and he was pulled beneath the surface. Just like that, Naruto had been taken right before their eyes. The moment that sank in, Rock Lee turned towards his teammate. "Neji-kun. There's a tunnel beneath the ground." Neji shouted, his Byakugan active now. "The one who grabbed him is using it to escape while draining his chakra. It looks like it's heading off towards the perimeter of the village." In other words, it was a kidnapping. Someone had attacked them with the intention of taking their friend, their comrade, and fleeing the village. Even with all the chakra Naruto had, it was useless if it was all drained before he could use it. And chances were they would never see him again by the time they could report it, especially between the spiders and the sniper in hiding. Hinata was the first to move, immediately running for the gaping hole as her own Byakugan flared to life, no doubt driven by her own past. "Naruto-kun, hold on." A low rumble bubbled up in the golem's throat at that, as if offended at the attempt to slip through while another arrow flew through the air to meet her charge. Uncaring as the golem slammed its fingers into the ground to pull up more earth and unwilling to stop, she fell into a slide to allow the arrow to narrowly miss her head. Then down into hole she went to chase after Naruto, even as the golem proceeded to wrench free a massive mound of compressed earth in the form of a dumpling and tossed it to crush everything around the hole and plug it. There was no more time to think. If that hole closed up, then they'd lose track of both Naruto and Hinata. He'd lose a friend and a teammate. So, pouring chakra into his legs as he scooped up his ninja pup, Kiba lunged for the gaping hole as Rock Lee entered into it next. His heart pounded in his chest as the shadow of death expanded beneath them before they managed to pass the mouth of the entrance. Barely. And then there was a deafening crash as the darkness became all-consuming and they fell into the unknown abyss to rescue Naruto before he could be taken away, entrusting the others to hold their own. End of Chapter 53. Chapter 54. Without a doubt in Shikamaru's mind, the most dangerous thing present wasn't the sniper lurking in the trees at the edge of the training field. Nor the golem that had upturned the earth and blocked off the chance to go after the original Naruto with the others. It was the horde of man-eating spiders that swarmed forward. They could dodge the sniper's attacks. They could outpace that massive earthen summoning. But the spiders were another story. Their numbers were so swollen they formed an onrushing tide, black waves rolling forward and blanketing the greenery of the grass. It was probably safe to presume they were poisonous too, if the intention was to wipe out all witnesses after securing their target, the original Naruto. His mind raced through options as the horde continued to move forward. The golem was too big and heavy to try and pin its shadow down. He could, theoretically, pin down a decent portion of the spiders as they swarmed forward, linking his shadow to one of theirs and then branching out like a root system. But between his range, the way they were spread out, and the sheer numbers, he'd be overtaken swiftly unless there was a way to pin them all down at once. All of them would. Techniques like the rotation and possibly the human boulder could stave off how long it would take for them to die, but it would still be by seconds. They needed something with a larger area of effect if they were going to create an opening to get away, or at least give him some breathing room to think of a better plan or strategy. So he turned to the clones to get it. Naruto, we need bodies between us. The response was nearly instantaneous. The pair of clones both created a set of 5 each for 10 shadow clones that formed in front of them. That was a little underwhelming given the threat that they were facing. Then those 10 created enough shadow clones that their side of the field was padded out drastically. Hundreds of clones had been called forth, only to then perform a transformation technique and create doppelgangers of everyone there. About a third of transformed clones surged forward, running to attack the incoming hordes and golem to buy time. The others hung back and mixed in to form groups around them to hide the real versions, Senbon in haystacks and all. Now that's more like it, Shikamaru thought before he felt a tugging sensation that signaled a substitution in progress. Given what he remembered from the Chunin exams, he went along with it and was swapped from his original position with one of the clones that had changed into a copy of him. The moment he touched down in the new position, he was pulled into a crouch with the other people. All the actual partygoers were there, crouched and hidden from plain sight in an alert state. Or unnerved, like Ayame, whose slender arms were wrapped around Konohamaru. It was an instinctive act to keep him safe as she struggled to keep herself calm at the insistence of the untransformed Naruto clones crouched next to her. Naruto, do you know what's going on? Shikamaru asked the clone he designated Clone A, suspecting it was one of the original 2. This is an orchestrated attack, so there has to be a reason for it. They work for Kabuto, Naruto Clone A explained, which said a lot given that Shikamaru knew the gist of what happened during the failed invasion. They tried to kidnap Karen and me twice now, first during the finals, when you were knocked out, and then during that mission, when the prison was broken open. I don't know how they got into the village, but there's probably 3 of them, at least. How dangerous are they? Choji asked next, trying to grasp just how bad the situation was beyond the current nightmare. Jonin at a minimum, each with a bloodline ability and a cursed seal that makes them even stronger than that, Naruto Clone B said without missing a beat. The notion sent tension threading through their muscles. He then turned to the 2 toads that were sitting down. Gamma Kichi and Gamma Tatsu, go home and see if your dad can't get a message to Jiraiya. As for the rest of you, the clones will make an opening for you to escape. Take Ayama and Konohamaru with you and get Anbu. That'll be impossible as things stand, Neji said as the pronounced veins bordering his Byakugan pulsed. He was straining them to see further. The clones are too fragile to last long. They're being overwhelmed between the number of spiders and the golem. The sniper also looks like he's preparing something to attack over a wider range. And even if we escape, Lee and the others are still chasing after the original you, Tenta noted. Lee's injuries may have been fixed, but if he's still not supposed to push himself too hard just yet. If these guys are really on par with Jonin then, Clone A cut her off. Every clone that's destroyed has its memories and chakra distributed to the remaining ones in the original, so he knows what's going on and can tell the others to get away. Between Lee's speed, Kiba's ability to tunnel straight through the ground with his clan's technique, and Hinata being able to see where they need to go, all three of them should be able to get clear. So that was why they staggered the creation of the clones. It was so they'd have enough chakra to use whatever technique that they have and would keep the original aware, Shikamaru figured. The clones that were caught up in holding back the spiders had the least amount of chakra, so them dispersing only returned a trickle of chakra back to every other clone that was still out in the original. But that trickle of chakra kept the original informed and would compound up if left unbothered. If the original gained the chakra back too fast while still being held by the person who was draining it, then they just keep draining him. But if the others managed to get the original Naruto free, then he could create a single clone with the return chakra and dispel it to inform the others to dismiss themselves and return whatever was left for him to use. The clone shifted his focus down to his hands that he held apart, palms facing each other. He balled them into fist before looking up to them again and said, "I've been practicing a wind technique called air bullet that I picked up from someone else. I can strengthen it enough to clear out everything if I can get close enough to the golem by injecting more wind chakra into it, but it'll be too dense for me to throw it and the other clones won't be able to survive it. It's all or nothing at that point, but you should be able to get away then." "We need to shift our priorities from escaping," Shikamaru said, now able to think with the borrowed time. "While a few of us should get the non-combatants out, I believe it'd be best if the rest of us focused on taking out that sniper once the spiders are cleared." "It's too dangerous," Clone A said. "It's more dangerous if we don't," Shikamaru insisted. "First off, the original you is the priority target. Even with what's left of the 2/3 of your chakra, return to the original and end. If this is the third time that they've come after you, then they'll have to have some way to account for being able to deal with you fighting back." "It's fine," Clone B said, looking to the small toads. "If they were going to kill the original, then they would have done it the moment they took him underground. The toads can reverse summon him in time if Gamakichi and Gamatatsu head back, so what's more important is that everyone else gets out safely. The summoning contract is a two-way thing, Naruto," Gamakichi said. "It uses chakra to bridge the gap between the 2 points in space and then brings the summoned party to the summoner. If they block off your chakra or put you somewhere that bridge can't form, then we won't be able to pull you back." "Which I'm sure they took into account," Shikamaru continued, writing off that explanation. "And that leads to the second issue. The moment you clear out the spiders, the sniper will flee, since he can't reasonably kill us all faster than we can spread out. That means he'll likely use an escape route to join up with the other one. Lee, Kiba, and Hinata aren't exactly equipped to deal with 2 Jonin-level enemies on their own. They'd die." Everyone present knew that without the words needing to be said. The other 3 could possibly manage to deal with the one who took Naruto, or at least get clear of him on their own. But if it became 2 against 3 in a pincer attack, then the chances of them living plummeted. "You have rank on us, Naruto, so if it's an order we technically have to listen," Shikamaru continued. "But the leaf doesn't abandon one of its own. Hinata, Lee, and Kiba all feel strongly enough that they're not going to let you be taken as long as they can move. So that means we need to adapt around that rather than leaving their fate up to chance." The pair of clones looked between each other silently. They nodded and asked, "What do you have in mind?" Shikamaru looked up at the sky. "That depends. How wide can you make your transformation?" Kitamaru POV. "This is just unnecessary work," Kitamaru thought to himself as he worked the silk spun from his mouth with a practiced familiarity. He was atop Kyotogumo as she hastened her reproduction rate with chakra to produce more offspring to send into the fray. Dozens of them had been set aside to weave a layer of silk to block off the exits around the tree line and layer the ground around it with webbing to ensnare any of the loose threads that managed to get past him. The precaution wasn't initially part of the plan. They were just supposed to grab the blonde kit and leave the others to be swarmed and devoured. That way the kidnapping didn't tip off the village and they didn't unravel anything about what was going on by chance until it was too late. After all, if one Jinchuuriki went missing, they'd definitely check on the other one they had stashed away before he could be unshackled and let loose to devastate the village. But Kitamaru had to readjust rather quickly since Jirobo had screwed up his part by allowing the target to leave behind those two clones. Even without tapping into the monster inside of him, that blonde kid had enough chakra that the two clones had spawned numbers to rival the spiders they'd had in waiting. There were less clones than there were spiders, but the differences were that the clones could kill more spiders faster than they could kill the clones, and the rate at which they could be replaced were drastically different. And if one made it out of the training field, then all of their efforts on this part would come undone. Fortunately, as long as the others who came to the party were there, the clones would focus on defense. That in mind, he used the head of an arrow he forged to cut through several lines of spider thread that were tied together, each one acting as a slingshot with chambered kunai nestled within them. With the tethering lines cut, a barrage of kunai were flung forward and sliced through the air onto the battlefield. They mowed through the army of clones that stood strong, impaling their fragile bodies and dissipating them en masse to thin their numbers. The first line of defense had fallen, allowing the spiders to continue their advance and clean house. The rest of the groupings dispersed to reinforce the line before they were overrun, with the exception of one. With his third eye open and the rest of the clones no longer hiding them, he could make out that it was the real group. Several of them had taken up defensive positions, putting themselves between the civilian and tiniest shinobi there, who looked as though he was trying to mold more chakra along with the insect-riddled Aburame. He knocked his bow with two arrows and prepared to take out the two main clones as he witnessed the chakra within them being tinted with the coloring of wind. He wasn't sure what they were planning, but he wouldn't let it get pulled off. But no sooner than he let the arrows loose did the Hyuga move to intercept them. In an instant he'd gotten to the front and spun around, exerting his chakra to form a spiraling barrier. The rotation deflected the arrows, their sharpened points being knocked aside, before he came to a stop in the center of a small crater from where the technique had dug into the ground. Then a collection of three clones, all of whom had dropped their transformations now that the deception had been revealed, raced out past him. One of the three made hand seals as they gathered right in the path of the golem that had been crushing everything that moved around it. Another transformed into a demon wind shuriken. The remaining clone grabbed the makeshift weapon and then flung it in a manner that sent it flying upwards and forwards as the first let loose the wind technique to give it additional velocity, allowing it to get high in the air above the horde. The aerial clone then resumed his normal form before changing again. This time into a giant cloth that stretched far and wide, a canopy to blot out the sun. Everything beneath it was covered in shadows as the Nara zone curved and snaked into the larger one. The horde was frozen in place. Every spider that entered the massive shadow stopped moving. Even those that crawled over the frozen counterparts were trapped, like they had been caught in a sticky trap. "Now," he shouted, voice strained as the two original clones rushed forward and the Akamichi swelled in size so the others could take cover behind him. The two primary clones ran forth, unhindered as they ran through the shadows towards the golem. One supplied an immense amount of wind chakra, while the other maintained a chakra casing to hold it all between them. The moment the distance shrank to zero, the clones slammed the sphere of condensed wind into the golem. Everything contained within the membrane spilled out at once. And the world trembled as a wall of wind was unleashed with a deafening roar. It expanded, sweeping up the earth, crushing the spiders caught in its wake, bellowing with a thunderous rumble that drowned out all sounds nearby. Kitamaru could only brace himself as the resulting turbulence swept over him even from his distant perch, threatening to throw him off the summoning that he was mounted on until the winds died down. When he opened his eyes again, the spider user found himself staring out at the crater that had been formed. The golem had been blown to pieces from being at the nexus of the attack, but it could pull itself back together as long as chakra was still present. The spiders, on the other hand, had been effectively wiped out, unable to flee as their bodies were crushed by the force. The only benefit was that the remaining clones had been cleared out by the attack. It was indiscriminate in who was caught up in the pressure wave it unleashed, with the other partygoers having been spared by distance and using the bulky Akamichi expansive form as an extra shield while anchoring themselves to the ground. But now nothing stood between them and escaping, even if the golem managed to repair itself. No sense in sticking around now, he decided. Reasonably speaking, there was no way to block them from escaping if they scattered, and there was no telling if the webbing he'd put into place hadn't been torn apart by the winds. Not to mention Sakan and Lulkan hadn't returned or sent out a signal. Better to play it safe and make a tactical retreat while we still have the objective. But before he could take off, a blur came into his third eye's view. Instinct kicked in. He reflexively abandoned his perch on Kyotogumo, lunging for the tree trunk opposite of it and landing just as the wet and crunchy sound of the giant spider's body being blown open reached his ears. Whipping his head around as she fell to the ground below, the Hyuga was already moving to attack him again with another gentle fist strike. The blow came mercilessly quick, with Kitamaru barely able to force out sticky gold silk through his pores an instant beforehand to harden into body armor beneath his clothes. The palm strike and chakra discharge that followed immediately sent him rocketing towards the ground. How'd he get here so quick? That thought flickered in his mind as the hard-packed and root-strewn soil broke upon his cursed seal-tempered backside. There was only minor pain, which was a fair trade-off considering he still had a heart, judging by where his shirt had been torn from the blow. Then he remembered how the Hyuga had blocked the previous arrows he'd shot. I got it. He used that same technique to block the pressure wave as it passed by him for a split second while the others took cover. Then ran behind it as passed through and cleared everything else in his way. Realizing that, he then retaliated by spitting out a casting net of webbing to pin the Hyuga down only for him to cut through it with his bare fingers as chakra danced along the edges. The subsequent attempt here resorted to spitting out a sharpened lance of golden webbing instead to gouge out his opponent's heart. The Hyuga dodged, ricocheting off the nearest tree trunk to lunge for another attempt on Kitamaru's life. It came as fast as before, but this time he was ready, secreting his sticky gold through the pores of his left arms and used them to intercept the strike. At the same time, he brought his right arms around to bash in his skull. Yet, the Hyuga used his extended hand as a springboard to flip over him and then thrust out with the other palm. It would have caught him in the back his head, certain death, had Kitamaru not flung himself forward in a flip of his own while spitting out another net of webbing that was aimed at his opponent's feet. It was blown away by a discharge of chakra from the Tenketsu there, but served its purpose in preventing immediate retaliation as the Sound Force sniper got his feet under himself again. They chose their vanguard well, Kitamaru decided after that exchange, as the bits of his hastily formed body armor clattered onto the ground. Even if the blows of the gentle fist couldn't penetrate it, the moment he let his guard down or tried to retreat was the moment that he would get a killing strike somewhere that wouldn't be protected. If he was going to escape, the Hyuga had to die first. Jirobo POV. Jirobo huffed. He exited the tunnel he'd created into an underground base that belonged to the subverted faction within the village known as Root, knowing he had been followed. He could hear the shouts through the tunnel for the blonde kid who was slung over his shoulders. The boy was drained of chakra with his wrists and ankles in stone cuffs, while a sealing slip was placed on his forehead to prevent him from molding more or accessing his demon. The Sound Force Earth user slammed his hand against the wall and then discharged the chakra being used to stabilize it. The rumble of the earth closing into the tunnel was short-lived as it collapsed under its own weight quickly. It was sealed off from anyone else using it in an instant, burying those within it to be crushed by the earth. "You won't get away with this," Naruto said, his voice hoarse and soft. "Tired? I thought I'd taken enough chakra to put you out," he said, before tightening his grip and sapping the remainder of the chakra out of Naruto's body. Because of his bloodline ability, Jirobo could take another person's chakra to use as nourishment. But the kid had a ton of chakra to eat, and he was almost full at this point, which was saying something. That being said, he didn't mind the top off from the boy going limp and silent as he lost the dregs of chakra he had. His target sedated once more, Jirobo then proceeded to follow through with the escape plan. He would meet up with the others outside of the village through the network of underground routes established by Root to get in and out of the village, unnoticed by their little detection system. However, the moment he was about to leave the room, the silence that haunted the chamber was shattered by the sound of earth rupturing beneath the force of a spiraling drill of flesh and bone. The Inyazuka came out of his passing fang with stone dust trailing after him, landing in front of the exit thanks to the momentum and blocking it. The other two emerged from the burrowed-out entrance and flanked him. Surrounded on three sides, a frown formed on Jirobo's face as he allowed his cursed seal to unfurl over his skin. "This is just going to make me hungry again." End of chapter 54.